Welcome to Design Downtime, the podcast where we celebrate the joys of living a balanced creative life. I'm your host, Guy Siegel, a design director in Toronto, Canada, and I invite you to join me on this journey as we redefine what it means to be a successful design professional. Let's break free from the shackles of hustle culture and embrace the full spectrum of human experience, because life is too precious to be spent only in pursuit of productivity. Today, I'm delighted to be talking with Soren Hamby. As a senior manager of UX, Soren is dedicated to fostering diversity and inclusion within teams while spearheading the transformation towards accessible design. With a BFA in design, postgraduate and professional coursework at Cornell, Parson, and CUNY, and a wealth of experience in the field, Soren is a seasoned professional committed to making the design industry more equitable. In their free time, they often indulge their creative side through crafting, fashion, collecting enamel pins, and creating weird art that glows. Welcome to the show, Soren.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. And today you want to talk to us about making glow art.
Yes, I'm very excited to talk about it. It's one of those things that I feel like is a little bit magical because it takes us out of making things that are very serious and very corporate and into a realm that's a little bit more experiential and allows us to kind of like dive into things that are a little outside of the realm of reality and like dream a little bit. So that's what I really love about this topic, is that it's both interesting to me from like a scientific perspective and like how it works, but then it's also really interesting to me as like far as the effect that it has on people and what you can do with it as a medium.
So I know nothing about glow art. Can you give me a quick overview of what is glow art?
So glow art uses fluorescent paints that glow when they're exposed to shortwave or ultraviolet or UV radiation. So it's often used like in theatrical lighting, in a lot of these new exhibits and experiences. Like there's a really cool collective called Meow Wolf that makes these large scale experiences. It's used in a lot of art galleries and things to create really interesting art. But essentially, it evokes the feelings of bioluminescence because when you expose it to these lights, it glows really brightly, like glow in the dark. Things that are technically glow in the dark will also glow under this shortwave UV light. It's also called black light, but it's really kind of purple. So I think it's a little bit of a misnomer. And I think most people that are in science would be like, it's not exactly the right word. So I think shortwave UV is probably the best way to put it, especially because there's so many kinds of black light. You have like the little keychain ones, and then you have ones that are made for sanitizing. So there's so many different frequencies that it's at that it's really a wide world. And essentially it holds and collects the light, and then it will reflect it back when it's shining. And just depends on if it's fluorescent or if it glows in the dark. That's just how much energy it stores and will then release. So I just find it really interesting. I was really fascinated by things like going to the aquarium and seeing like jellyfish when I was a kid. And so I think it's just kind of an extension of that wonder and that awe at like, oh my gosh, this like actually exists in life, that there's something so magical about our world that, you know, we could just glow out of nowhere. I think that's really special. And it evokes for me like a feeling of exploration and like mystery, and like it was really unexplained when I was a kid. I didn't understand like why there were some animals that glowed and some that didn't. And it was kind of fun to imagine a world where everything glowed. And I think there was like a bunch of animated movies that sort of touched on those topics, like kind of incorporating animation and action. It's a little bit of like magical realism. So I think that really stuck with me as I grew up. And then what kind of kicked all of this off, especially from like a participatory art perspective for me, was that I was trying to think of a cool idea for a birthday party, and 3 people that were living in my house at the time, myself and my partner and our roommate, all have birthdays at the same time. So within 6 days of each other. And we wanted to do something fun that like all of our friends would enjoy, and we're all kind of artsy. So we were putting together ideas, and we had a bunch of cardboard boxes from a purchase. And we thought, what if we turned our whole living room into a cardboard box fort? And I was like, well, let's like take it one step further. I love like 80s aesthetic and neons and stuff. So like, let's let's make it like a glow art party. So I started just like collecting all the glow art stuff that I had, like paints, and then I started getting like some body paint and makeup and stuff, and asked people to wear stuff that would look good under black lights. And we started putting the black lights all around. We got some of those little cheap glow sticks and created like this maze of a cardboard box for it, and then let people decorate it once they got there. So we put like some suggestions, and we had like strategically placed UV lights, and people made chandeliers from the glow sticks. And there were these beautiful paintings. There was like a courtyard in the middle with flowers vining up, and people painted, just like all these beautiful, whimsical things all over. One of my friends sat there, and he's a physical therapist. And so he just used his finger and dotted out his entire bone structure on his non-dominant arm. And it was just like perfectly and anatomically correct. And it was just like so beautiful that it was something that was just really magical. So we've tried to incorporate that several times into some other activities. Now there's this really cool craft fair and makers thing called Lunar Fair that happens every new and full moon in the New York, New Jersey area. And it moves around to different locations. And we did a similar thing there where we built a cardboard box for it on top of a pallet and inside of like a 10 by 10 tent, and had people come and add their stuff to the cardboard box for it. And then at the end of the night, we cut up all the different art and gave it away to people. And it was just a really fun kind of side quest to do there. And it was something that people didn't have to pay for. And so it was like kind of a fun thing that everyone could participate in and everyone could access. So I feel like that's something that really appeals to me about it, is that you don't have to be like really good at art to do glow art. Like it's kind of good just because it glows. So like whatever you do with it, it doesn't really matter, because some of the goodness of it is just that it's magical in and of itself.
I'm really curious to hear more about the magical aspect of glow art for you, because as you mentioned, one of the first things that you saw that sort of this possibility of things glowing was in the aquarium, right? You saw like how it occurs in nature in an organic way, but then bringing it into art, into crafts, into the human world, it takes on a different meaning.
Yeah. So I didn't know until I was an adult that I was neurodivergent, but I figured out that I've had these really deep pockets of interest where I would just dive really deeply into a subject as a child. And that was something that I dove really deeply into, as marine biology. And so I was just like really interested in learning as much as I could about like anglerfish and dolphins and jellyfish. And when I discovered that some animals were bioluminescent, I was like, it's so cool. Like it was something where I felt like it was almost alien, like, oh, like there's almost like an idea that maybe those animals could be from another planet, or like it's something that I don't do. So, well, I mean, I glow a little bit just because my skin is so light, but I feel like there's this magicalness to seeing an animal like in the darkness all of a sudden like start pulsing and like trailing this like magical like contrail of like just glowing jelly. That's really cool to me. Just like seeing the trailing tentacles, and it's just very soothing, and it's also just amazing. Like there's this I haven't ever felt anything but awe and admiration when I see like a jellyfish in the water. There's a really great big aquarium in Atlanta, which is near where I grew up, and they have a tube that you can go through. And so the aquarium is actually like all around you. And normally I think I would be a little bit put off by that, because like it's the feeling of like a little bit of claustrophobia of like being surrounded by water. But the tube is so big that like it's not close to you at all. So it feels like very spacious. So I walked through there, and there's just like all of these sea creatures around, and they do have a jellyfish tank there. And I think that's probably where I first saw them like glow really brightly, is that if you're on a school trip, sometimes they'll turn down the lights so that you can see them really well in the jellyfish room. And it just was such an amazing experience that I don't think I've ever quite recovered from. But there's just this idea of like also making your own magic a little bit, of like stepping out of who you are and kind of like creating an alternate self or an alternate future or kind of like imagining creating a like a sameness about us. Like even if there's like a lot of differences in between like me and my friends and the things that we like and the things that we do, like there's this common activity that we're doing or we're using this common medium and we're kind of like doing this thing together, which I feel like is a really nice unifying activity. And also just the act of kind of like having a thing that we're all really excited about and that does feel kind of, I mean, it's a little bit childlike wonder, a little bit playfulness. I think we kind of need that sometimes, especially in the times that we're living in right now.
Another thing that sounds really interesting to me is the fact that you need to do something in order to sort of expose the glow art. Like you don't see it naturally within our visible spectrum. Is it something that adds to your fascination? Like having this kind of secret in a way that you can sort of turn on and off if you need to?
Yeah, I think so. The other thing is that like you said, it's something that you kind of have to expose. That means that some of the spaces where there's this like really large art installations like Meow Wolf, there are spaces that have to be very, very dark. And I do have a visual disability, so that makes it a little bit harder for me to navigate personally. And so one of the things that I did was I actually added glow elements to my assistive technology. So I have a probing cane that I use, and I actually added glowing gaff tape and wrapped it in sections around. So I call it my party cane because it looks really fun. It's like, pink and orange and yellow and green and blue neon tape on it. And like it's just kind of fun to have even when it's not glowing. But when I take it to places like that, it helps people see me. And it helps me kind of like judge distances and find my way around. And it becomes like a great accessibility item for me, which I know we're not talking about work, but it just kind of tickled me in a way because like accessibility can be really fun too. Like it can be really creative and you can find things to kind of make it really fascinating and fun as well. So that's one thing that kind of tickled me about it is that even though you do have to kind of like do something and you have to be in a different environment that has lower light to be able to get the full effect of some of these fun mediums, like you also can use the medium to kind of like support yourself through the change in environment, which I feel like is really cool.
Was that party that you mentioned, was that the first time you really got into glow art, or was that something that started before?
So I think I kind of dabbled in it before because I did have some supplies on me. I think it was just something that I had maybe like seen some makeup or something and had grabbed. Like there's definitely occasions that I've had to use it, like maybe going to like a pride event or something. It's very fun to maybe like have some glow in the dark makeup. And like I said, glow in the dark and fluorescent are very close because they do both fluoresce under UV light. But there's so much more options under like the fluorescent category to kind of play with than the glow in the dark category because there's less kind of minerals and stuff that glow in the dark and that retain that glow for an extended period of time, and they don't last very long. So as like an art medium, it doesn't make as much sense because the colors fade over time as they store that energy and release it. So I think fluorescent makes a lot of sense, even though it takes that additional step of having like a shortwave UV light. It just makes a lot of sense for longevity of art, even though also it's not the most long-lasting art process as well, and it will eventually break down a little bit faster than some other paints. But that's kind of beautiful in a way too, because it's not here forever. But I think like that party was the kickoff of other parties that we did that were similar. It was the kickoff of a big installation art piece that we did here in the basement, and then several other pieces after that. And then it was definitely the impetus for all of these other activities and then my own personal art projects. Before that, I think I mainly focused on doing stuff with more like watercolors and maybe some occasional acrylics and things, but I really hadn't done a lot of my own art. I've mainly been focusing on my design career since I graduated from my BFA program many years ago. And I didn't really have my own art practice. And now I kind of have one. And that's something that I feel like I have more of a voice and like a style with glow art than I had with some of my other art.
How do you approach making glow art differently than they do, as you say, acrylic or those kinds of more traditional physical arts?
Well, for one, you have to think about how it renders once you turn on the light and how it looks when you don't have the light on, because it is like a piece that exists outside of the actual glow viewing space. You sort of have to think about the balance of the colors, because sometimes using all fluorescence can be a little overwhelming depending on the space. And you have to think about creating contrast, because there's a lot of paintings in which I think that it can be really interesting to use like a whole background of neons and fluorescence, and then have like some really dark, like ultra flats, blacks and grays or whites to kind of cut through that and offer like the foreground image. So it kind of almost pushes it out or pushes it back a little bit depending on where you use it. So you could either make the background all flat colors and kind of push it forward with some neons, or you can kind of like push the black or white or other flat colors forward with a background of neons. So it's a really interesting difference, because you have to think about how that renders, but still like have a composition that looks good when you don't have the lights on. So that's one thing that I really enjoy about it, is that you can get a lot of dynamic sort of effects once you turn the lights on, because it's almost like changing it. There's also some really cool lights that I've seen in some galleries that change the wavelengths as like they just kind of cycle through really gently. And so it kind of sometimes brings out different colors a little bit more strongly, or changes how it looks a little bit. And I really like to experiment with those lights a little bit, because it looks like it reflects differently on different fluorescent wavelengths. And so it gives you just even more to play with. But yeah, I think the main thing is just thinking about both like the symbolism that you want to have in the piece, and or it can also just be aesthetic, but like what elements do you want to pull out and what elements do you want to kind of push forward or like make the most important, and then thinking about like aesthetically what looks good, because you can still get like some really nasty looking colors if you mix them too closely together, or like sometimes the glow color is different than the like resting color of the paint. So you have to be a little bit careful about sometimes when you like merge them together, like a white paint can look green or it can look blue. So maybe if you put it like right beside an orange, it may not look good because you make it brown where it kind of bleeds together. So things like that, you have to just know your medium and think about like how you want to set up the composition.
So what is your personal style when it comes to glow art?
So I've been really exploring a lot more organic shapes. The piece that I have behind me right now in the basement is a topography piece that also has like some human figural aspects as the piece that I push forward. And it's a really common theme in my work is the topography or like some very like abstract organic shapes. I also really like the idea of mysterious, like I have like a lot of eyes and hands and stuff in my work. Part of that is an exploration of disability and the fact that I have one eye that is blind. And so like I have a lot of pieces in my home that feature eyes because I have one decorative eye. So I figure I might as well have a lot. So that's one thing that I feature a lot in my work. Also have like a lot of space themes and things too in my work, which I like a lot. But I also sometimes write poetry, and that it's the same way there. Like people are like, oh, I bet you write like a lot of poetry about like design or something. And I'm like, actually, no, like most of my poems are about like being the moon or a geode or like something like that, a bat. It's not like, it's not literal, but I use a lot of metaphors from nature because I think it's something that's a little bit more relatable to people. And it's something that they can, even if they don't relate to the subject that I'm painting about or that I'm talking about, they can still relate to the aesthetic of it, or like they might really like how it feels. So that's something that, we find commonality, like something to them feels good about the way that I've painted it or what I'm saying through that. So I'm showing it to them in a new way. Like, who's seen a neon bat before? I mean, probably people have done it before, but maybe that person hasn't seen it. So it's really interesting to kind of find something where people are like, oh, I've never seen this particular thing before. And I like how it's arranged or like how you've composed it. So that's something that I find really nice.
Are you part of the glow art scene? I am assuming there is one.
I actually don't know. I think we're kind of creating one at Lunar Fair, actually, though. There's definitely some creators that are making glow items. I've seen a lot of creators that are making things like D20s for like playing role-playing games where they cast them in resin, and so they use like glow resin. So that's very popular, is to use like to mix the pigments in. Actually, I have some of the pigments here. So it's just like a little powder that you mix into the resin, and it has the fluorescent pigments in it, and it reflects the light back out when you expose it to the shortwave UV, which I think is just really cool that you could do that. You just have a clear resin and you just put a pigment in it and stir it up, and then it's fluorescent. It's just so cool. Yes, I've started seeing some other artists do that, and then after my partner did the cardboard box fort thing with the participatory art, they ran it again as like a tunnel. So it was like some sort of like fairy tunnel kind of thing, which I thought was really cute. Yeah, so I feel like there's becoming maybe a little bit of a scene, but I don't know. It's just I'm involved in so many other community projects. I feel like I don't have the mental capacity to try to like start up or enter another community organizing project. But I think if there is, and I can be involved in a low effort way, I totally would.
Is glow art considered, a respectable art form, or is it still on the sidelines?
I think it doesn't matter, honestly. I think there's different ways to use different mediums. And so like I think it's more about the subject matter. And I think it's more about like how you present it and how you do it, because there's, like I mentioned Meow Wolf earlier, and they definitely have their own there's a lot of criticism of, like how they exist as a collective. But I think what they've done as like showing the commercial viability of art is really interesting, because they have been growing a lot. They have 4 locations. I've been to 3 of them, and they are all really interesting statements on different social problems. So like one of them is about environmentalism and like the impact that we have on the environment, and they have some really interesting art there. They work with a lot of like lights and transparency and like really large scale sort of art pieces, and then they have like a lot of glow art different areas inside of that. So the whole thing isn't glow art, but I would say that fluorescence and glowing and that sort of thing is a big part of it. And their Denver location, Convergence Station, there's like a painting on one wall that has those color changing lights, and actually the painting changes because you see different stuff with the different frequencies of UV light, which is just mind blowing. But I think they're always packed. They're always selling tickets. Like they're always expanding. So I feel like they're an excellent example of how you could say that it is its own form of art like that, but it falls more into like kind of the experiential, because they have all this storytelling in there, and they have like, just the social commentary. So I think you can't really separate the medium from what Meow Wolf is doing, but like you could say that glow art is part of what they're doing, because it's just like a huge part of their business model, is like that, creating this magical experience. In fact, they have a sign at the beginning of the exhibit that says you can't come in if you're under the influence of anything, because I think it's just like such a trippy experience anyways, that they're like, it cannot be on any kinds of drugs or alcohol, which I think is a good idea, honestly, after having gone, because there's such an interesting story there on some of them. But like there's a bus that's just like cut in half through a wall, and I think if you were just a little inebriated and going through there, you'd be like a little bit off put by it. But I think it's really interesting what they've done with their work, and I think it's a good proof of concept for how we could commercialize art if we wanted to, and how artists could be paid for their work. Because right now I see like most artists that are doing art are selling it like just kind of like on Etsy or at craft fairs. It's like very low level, or like they're really all DIY kind of stuff. And I think like I'm not trying to make a living at doing glow art. I do it for myself. I do it for fun. But I think there are people that are trying to make a living doing art, and even specifically glow art, like making items that glow. And I think that there's kind of a resurgence of people doing like the blacklight posters and tapestries and all this kind of cool stuff and items for people to have in their home. I think that decorative arts definitely have a place in people's lives, and that if people want to have them in their homes, then there's definitely a place for it.
You mentioned that your cane is decorated with glow art. Do you incorporate glow art into your everyday life in other ways?
Oh, well, I mean, it is part of my home. I do like to use glow art as a way of winding down. So, like, practicing it, yes. And I do have several places in my home that I have glow art to enjoy myself. Here in my studio, in my living room, of course, where I entertain, I have some glow items where I can just switch the UV lights on, and then it's party mode. And then I have like some pieces in my bedroom that I really like. And previously I had some black lights or some UV lights set up in there that were like kind of permanently stationed, but they were cannibalized for something else. But yeah, I think that as an accessibility item, I don't use it as often as I probably could. But as like a beautiful stress relief sort of item, and as an outlet for my creative passions, yes, I use it a whole lot. I've started making like these little paintings, which I feel like are a lot more fulfilling for me than making like a lot of large scale stuff, because the large scale stuff takes months and months for me to make. But I'll just like do a batch of prepping like these little tiny wood canvases, and then I'll have them prepped. To prep them, you just have to sand them and put like a coating on them that prepares them for being painted on. And then once that dries and you sand it again, it's ready to go. And so like after that's done, I'll like, sit down and like I'll just sketch a tiny painting, and like I can do that in one evening really easily, or I can do like 3 in one evening really easily. And so it gives me a sense of like having completed something. And I think that, sometimes in our industry, we sometimes feel like very Sisyphusian, like we're doing the same thing over and over. We're solving the same problems over and over. And that can kind of like give me a sense of having completed something on my to-do list, because I'm like, oh, I wanted to do an art today. Okay, I finished an art. Like it gives me a sense of like completing something, which is really important to me sometimes.
You mentioned that one of the things that draws you into glow art is the experimentation, the sense of, I'm going to try something. I'm not really sure how it comes out. I'll find out. What is next for you with experimenting with glow art?
Ooh. So I am experimenting with my first like really, really large scale piece right now in my studio, which is a 4x8 foot piece. I think the next step is I have a laser cutter, and so I want to maybe experiment with some 3D glow pieces where I like laser cut wood, and then each of those pieces are hand painted and then assembled together. And I would like to do some more pieces that are maybe like more public art based, and thinking about like showing the experiences that I've had. So I've had this idea of doing like maybe like a suspension so that people could see what it's like to have some of like the eye issues that I've had in the past, and to kind of like simulate that in a really interesting way. So I'm trying to figure out that whole process out right now. But I think it's interesting because I have so many documents of like what my eyes looked like the doctors take all these pictures like every time I go in for a checkup every couple of months. And so I have like this like chart of how my eyes have looked over time. And I think it would be really interesting because they even like shoot a fluorescent dye into like, they give you like a IV, and they put the fluorescent dye in, and then they take pictures and they just like see if there's any leaks or anything, and like that your eye is doing okay. And so that just made me think like, oh my gosh, we could do like even take those pictures of the fluorescent dye and like make art out of it, which would be so cool. So I'm negotiating the release of those pictures right now, so I could see if I could reproduce those with some art. But I think there's many directions I could go in. I'm also trying to incorporate just a little bit more of the art style into my branding for myself, because I found that I was really enjoying the glow art, and I wasn't really enjoying the whole like trying to adhere to like a more corporate-y looking personal style. And so I was like, you know what, let's just like make it a little bit more fun and a little bit more weird. So I worked with an illustrator, and I was like, these are the things that I kind of like would like to see in some illustrations. And then I was just like, just kind of run with it. And so I got back some illustrations recently, and they were just so fun. Some feature me as an astronaut or an alien. The color palette is like very neon glow art, and it's going to be like my personal website palette from now on. So I'm like, well, great, because now I can use these to promote my art. So I'm thinking that like the personal and like the work is slowly kind of like coming together, and I think I want to incorporate it more a little bit into what I bring to the table as a professional as well, just because I think it's a really creative way of doing things, and I've used it in creative ways. So I guess why not? But I think also I'd like to see like what other mediums besides paint I could get into, like physical mediums or even like digital mediums, like maybe light projection. Maybe that's something that would be really cool. So anyways, there's lots of possibilities. I like to try things out and see what sticks, but there's been many mediums that I've tried, and this one has stuck the longest. So
That's awesome. I'm excited to see what you come up with next.
thanks.
Soren, where can people find you?
People can find me at Soren, SOREN.OOO.
That is an amazing URL for a website.
Thank you. I don't know if it means like ooh or if it means out of office, but either way,
Why not both?
it could be both. Yes.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was great to talk to you.
This is all for this episode of Design Downtime. Thank you for joining me. And until next time, I hope you enjoy your downtime.